So welcome. The theme of this conversation, as you know, is resilience. And I'm hoping we can figure out by the end of it why these two extraordinary men that I'm going to be talking to tonight have overcome the obstacles they've overcome when the rest of us, like me, are driven to satanic rage and despair over things like the guy who's driving in front of you in the no passing zone at the speed limit and will not go faster, or packaging, or things that drive the rest of us insane in ordinary life. Travis Mills is a retired U.S. Army Staff Sergeant of the 82nd Airborne, and he served 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan. And until in 2012, he lost parts of all 4 of his limbs when an IED exploded next to him. And he became one of only 5 U.S. veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan to have survived as a quadruple amputee. Before he was a military hero, he was a football hero. He was the star of the Vulcans of Vassar, Michigan. And he was so famous in his hometown that his high school girlfriend was once stopped by a policeman for speeding. And he asked her where she was going, and she said she was going to visit her boyfriend, Travis Mills, and the policeman let her go without a ticket.
Yeah. It's true.
And after recovering from his wounds, Travis started a foundation, the Travis Mills Foundation, which supports veterans, especially wounded veterans, in reintegrating into civilian life. Because as I'm sure you all know, there have been a lot of suicides, a lot of divorces when veterans come home, and this foundation, with a combination of retreats and other programs, tries to help with that. And his motto is, never give up, never quit. Travis Mills.
Thank you.
And Danelle Padilla Peralta is a Mellon Research Fellow in Classics at Columbia University. He has an MPhil from Oxford and a PhD in Classics from Stanford. And for any normal person, this would be achievement enough. But Danelle also grew up poor and for part of his childhood in a homeless shelter in New York City, also undocumented. And so he overcame a little more than the average. He was also famous as a child, but for rather different things. He was famous for instance, knowing the Pope's real Polish name when he was very tiny, and for reading histories of Greece and Rome while still in elementary school. And I kind of imagine it like a movie star might be discovered. He was discovered reading a biography of Napoleon while I think about 8 in a homeless shelter in Bushwick, and a guy who was working at the shelter saw this child reading this extraordinary book and helped him win a full scholarship to collegiate in Manhattan, and that started him off on his academic path that he's been on ever since. So please welcome Danelle as well. So I've sketched the outline, but can you tell us more? Like, is this microphone okay? It sounds a bit echoey. What inspired you to go into the military in the first place?
To be honest with you, I had a girlfriend that told me I should move home from my college to go to college with her, so I did. And she had a boyfriend named Colin. So that was awkward for me. And I thought, I gotta try something different. So I went to the military because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do when I was in college. I wasn't really motivated at the time to go out there and go to class every day, and I need to figure something else out. I know it's probably not what everyone wants to hear, but I'm just going to be honest with you. And I went to the military, and the Army was offering me a $24,000 signing bonus. I have no idea where that money is at, but I think it was fun. It's a joke. It's a joke. I bought a ring with it for my wife that I'm still married to today. But that's what inspired my military career. I wanted to try something different, see what I could do. And at 19, I joined the military, and at 19, I was in Afghanistan in charge of 3 other guys in a truck, Humvee overseas, and $1.5 million worth of equipment. So it was pretty fun and kind of a crazy different lifestyle change I made.
And you said that, when you were over there in Afghanistan, the official mission is to help the Afghan people rebuild their society, but you felt that you were really there for your fellow soldiers, that was what drove you. Can you tell me a bit about you said it's sort of like being on a football team, but there's something about that kind of brotherhood that you don't have anything like it in civilian life.
Well, absolutely. So it's a brotherhood for sure. You have people that come from throughout the whole entire nation, and they live at a place that they're not from, and they form a bond with people that are in the same situation. They came from, like I came from Michigan. My best friends came from Ohio, surprisingly, because I'm a Go Blue fan. Anyways, but, and you live, yeah, and you live together, and you go overseas, and yes, you rebuild the structures, their infrastructures, you build wells, and you know, have the girls go to school, and you teach them about education and all the programs that we offer here in the States, but when it boils down, who has your back, it's the guy to your left and the guy to your right, and you want to make sure that they come home safely and to their families with their loved ones, and that's kind of your main goal and your main focus is always looking out for the person to your left and right that's wearing the same uniform that you have on.
So one thing that really struck me is I've never been in combat, and over you describe these, to me, very, very hair-raising situations, and you say you weren't actually frightened during them. Why do you think that was? Is that true of your fellow soldiers, or is it something about you?
I mean, with my training, I was taught that you're going to be shot at, you're going to be in situations where guys get hurt, and you're going to have to fix them up, and you're going to have to keep moving under fire and in stressful conditions and situations that you normally wouldn't face here in the States. But I wasn't afraid, I guess, because I just figured no matter what the outcome wasn't going to be anything that I changed. I didn't have a say in my overall well-being, and I had to get the mission done. So I was as safe as I could be. I did everything that to proper standard operating procedures, but when it came down to firefights and things like that, if I had a team on the left and a team 100 meters away on the right, and I had to talk to both of them, I had to get up and run over there. I couldn't sit and wait, because if I sit and wait and hesitated, that meant there's other lives on the line that I'm responsible for that I could be letting down because I was too afraid to do what I had to do for my job.
Makes sense, I guess. It still sounds amazing to me. Danielle, you were born in the Dominican Republic into a middle-class family. Your mom, she was a director of a pension fund, and your dad taught accounting, I believe. And they came to New York because your mother was having complications with a pregnancy with your younger brother, and she needed to have medical attention in New York. And then she wanted to have a better life for you and your brother, and she decided to stay, and your father returned. Could you tell us a bit about, I mean, obviously at the time you were too little to understand what was going on, but from what you know now, tell us a little bit about the decision of your mother, the decision of your father, and how that worked out for you and your brother.
My mom was captivated by what she saw in the States. She was captivated particularly by the sight of me in school in the States. And so after she had dealt with some of the medical setbacks that arose during the course of her treatment, she and my dad began having all of these conversations, some of which I overheard. I couldn't really make sense of what it was they were arguing about, but I knew that one of the issues that was of concern to them was, well, should we stay in the States or should we head back to Santo Domingo? And what kinds of life opportunities would there be for our two children if we returned to Santo Domingo? And my parents had gotten report cards from my kindergarten teacher, and my kindergarten teacher had said that I really enjoyed learning English, and they had noticed that I really, really took to learning English. And Mom didn't want to surrender the idea of a new life for her sons in the States, one that would enable her two sons to pursue educational opportunities that might not be available in Santo Domingo. And so that's what she put forward to my dad. My dad reluctantly signed on initially to stick around, and together the two of them worked to make ends meet. But after a few years, my dad grew too tired of this and suffered an injury, and so then he decided to head back. My mom remained committed to the idea of our getting a U.S. education, and so she decided to stick it out with my brother and me.
And your brother was a U.S. citizen, having been born in New York, but you weren't and your mother weren't, and so she couldn't work, and she didn't want to fake papers like people sometimes do. She felt pretty strongly about that. So how did you survive? You started out in an apartment in Queens when your father was still there, and then you ended up in a homeless shelter. Could you describe to me again, you probably didn't understand what was going on when you were 5 and 6, but what was going on, and how did she make ends meet for you?
So initially when my dad left us, my mom was convinced that she could take up a variety of odd jobs here and there, do some babysitting. She was taking care of the children of a couple that lived not that far away from us. She asked around for any opportunities that her family members could alert her to. But eventually it dawned on me that we were really short on money. So my mom would send me to the local store to pick up food on credit. And one day the local bodega owner refused to keep giving us food on credit and told me that my mom owed money. And so my mom came with me and he said, I can't give you any more on credit. Eventually we were evicted from our apartment. One day we came back and our things were being moved right out of the apartment and deposited onto the sidewalk. And it was at that point that my mom decided to reach out to a friend who lived in the area, friend who had been introduced to her by one of her relatives, and see if we could stay in the friend's basement for a stretch. And so we stayed in the basement until the basement flooded after some piping burst. And at that point, my mom decided that the only real option we had left was to enter the New York City shelter system. And that's where we went when I was 8, and we spent about a year in 2 shelters, one in Chinatown, Manhattan, and the other in Bushwick. Throughout the entire time, I didn't quite know what to make of it. I felt on the one hand that my mom could, if only she reached out to some of her relatives, that maybe we would not be in this situation. I understood, though, that my mom was really committed to this idea of making things work out on her own. She felt she didn't need anyone's help. She didn't want anyone's help. And she was so proud that she didn't want to convey to her relatives or to her friends that she had somehow failed, which is what she construed our entry into the shelter system to be.
Well, that actually leads into what I was going to ask you, Travis, which was, you know, there's a very moving, well, there are many moving parts in your book, but one of them is, and sorry, I promised you, both these men in their books say how they really would prefer to make a joke than talk about emotions, but I warned them that I was going to ask them about emotions, so here it comes. We've done with facts, now we're going to go into feelings. Jumping off of what Danielle was just saying, after you were first wounded and you're lying in hospital and you haven't seen your family yet, you said that you didn't want to see your wife or even really talk to her on the phone. Can you tell us why?
Absolutely. So when I was hit, it was April 10th of 2012. And on April 14th, I woke up for the very first time in Landstuhl, Germany. And April 14th happens to be my mom and dad's favorite day ever in the whole entire world, my birthday. So I'm like, yeah, I got an older sister and younger brother. They don't really count. Their anniversary, whatever. No. I woke up on my 25th birthday, and when I saw my brother-in-law sitting in the room with me in Landstuhl, Germany, the first thing I said, my soldiers are my soldiers. That's what came first. And then the next thing I said, am I paralyzed? And he said no. And I said, no, Josh, I can take it. Like, I can't feel my fingers and toes, so am I paralyzed? And he said, Travis, you're not paralyzed, but you don't have them anymore. And then he told me what happened. So then I was let down, I was embarrassed, I was angry that, you know, this had happened. I thought, what happened? Like, why would this be something I would have to go through? I'm a really good soldier, I'm good at my job, I make rank quick, I take care of my guys, you know, I have really high marks on my, you know, grade report, I guess you would call it in the Army, it's NCOER. So I was just too embarrassed and frustrated with the situation, and I didn't want to talk to my wife because I feel like I let her, my daughter, and my mom and dad, and my, you know, the overall support, I let them all down, and I was a failure. So I wouldn't really call, and when I did call, it was just a real quick conversation. And when I made it to the hospital on April 17th, my wife's first conversation that we had was actually sign the paper because she was in charge of my medical care, and my sutures ripped open in my right leg, and they had to cut 2 inches higher off my leg. But the next day I told her, look, take Chloe, which is my little girl, who was 6 months old at the time, and take the house, the money, the car. It's not that we have a lot, but you can have it. It's yours. I'll financially fund you with whatever I get. You can have, you know, open bank account, anything you need. But I can't open jars. I can't take care of things I need to, you know, to take care of. And I just wanted her to know, like, she didn't have to bear this burden. It wasn't, you know, her problem. It was mine. She let me know quickly that that is not how this is going to work. Also, ladies, I'm married. Gentlemen, I'm married. I'm sorry. I want to break hearts and mend friendships. But once my wife said she was going to stay with me, I decided that I was going to spoon feed myself, that I was going to get back out there and I was going to be the one that took my daughter to school and drove myself around and my wife around and things like that. So it was a real turning point when she told me that she was going to stay by my side after I gave her the out. I mean, I don't think I'd give her that chance today. No. Sorry.
And you also describe feeling quite a bit of anger at, why as you said, you were a good soldier. You didn't do something stupid. You didn't do anything reckless. Why should you end up in this situation? How did you think your way out of that?
Well, I guess the mental problem was, like, the mental recovery was worse than the physical. Physical is easy for me. Check this out. I do CrossFit. What's up? But mentally, it was the worst thing ever. Did you get that? So mentally, it was the worst part for me, and I just had to come down to the conclusion that I'm not a bad person. Bad things happen to good people. There is a little bit of underlying tone of faith in the book. It's part of Convergent Print, which has faith in it. I don't push hard with my faith in the book because I have mine and everybody has their own, and that's fine. But I just had to realize that I'm lucky to still be here. I have friends that didn't make it home, that won't see their wives, they won't see their kids, they won't be home with their families for holidays, and I'm fortunate to still be here. So once I got over the feeling sorry for myself, about 2 weeks in, I just decided to go full force at my recovery. I met another gentleman in my same situation that was a couple years ahead of me, and once I saw it could be done, I decided, hey, let's get after it. So I yelled, my doctor and me got in an argument about working out, and I got so frustrated, I said, I'm gonna jump out of this bed and low crawl down to OT, which was silly, because there was a powered wheelchair right next to me. But I started my recovery, and then I went for 1 hour of each that they allowed me, and then I started going 2 hours, and then up to 4 hours of OT and PT, and 40 hours a week for my recovery. So it just took my wife being there, understand that it can be done, and that I had to, be motivated to be resilient to this situation, because I'm the one that's going to be my daughter's, father and take care of everything. So that's kind of my mindset how I did it.
Well, what about you, Danielle? You had also reasons to be pretty frustrated with the hand life had dealt you, and I'm thinking particularly, there's many really interesting incidents in your book, but one I'm thinking of is you'd started to date a white girl at Princeton, and she called it off in a sort of weird way, and you weren't sure what's going on, and finally she admitted to you that her parents said they would no longer fund her college education if she continued to date you because you were black. And that made you pretty mad. How did you think about that?
So I was angry, but also felt I couldn't communicate or convey my anger. I decided that I had to veil it. I didn't want to show her that I had been hurt by what she'd revealed to me. I didn't want her to know that I'd been hurt by the knowledge of what her parents thought about interracial dating. But on another level, this encounter also gave me an opportunity to think about what it was that had contributed to her upbringing and what it was about her parents rearing her that made her arrive at the decision that it was preferable to break things off rather than continue dating me. And I tried in the course of the months after the incident to think things through from her perspective. And it was one of the moments where I found that some of the approaches that I had learned over so many years of trying to read about other people's experiences and so many years of humanistic training, this actually sort of paid off for me. I tried to enter into what things must have been like for her. That didn't entirely dull the pain. I was still pretty angry. And some of that anger comes through in the book, in the dismissiveness that I adopted and this effort at distancing myself from the incident as quickly as possible. But throughout it all, I did try to make sense of what it must have been like for her to hear this from her parents and for her to recognize fully the implications of what her parents were telling her. And that kind of thinking from other people's perspectives was what made me, in the end, somewhat better equipped to deal with the experience and make sense of it to myself.
Well, it's interesting because, something else you talk about in the book is you have a friend, Derek, who went to Brown, who you knew from high school, and who's also African American, and he was often telling you that you weren't angry enough, that you needed to be more angry, that you needed to stop dating white girls, and he put you on quite a moral trip about all of that, political, and I wondered what you think about that. You said we talked beforehand, and you said that your thinking had evolved vis-a-vis Derek's points. What do you think about it now?
So, in the book, I talk a little bit about how I tried to play off or rebut some of Derek's arguments. And we had a very contentious relationship, one that was very loving. Derek and I had known each other since we were kids. but one that was also fraught because I felt that every opportunity he had to criticize me for my dating choices or for what he perceived to be my unwillingness to get too mad or rage like he wanted to rage, I kept reminding him that I wasn't who he was and that I didn't share some of his priorities. But over the years, as you've indicated, I've done a lot of thinking about what my own placement and my own obligations are as someone who, as a person of color, went to these institutions and had this whole range of experiences in which I consistently felt myself to be in the minority, and in fact, oftentimes singled out on account of being in the minority. And so I've grown very appreciative of Derek's perspectives. I can't say I agree with many of them, and he himself has evolved since one thing I do not disclose in the book is that Derek has finally capitulated and started dating white girls too. And
That was so good of you not to mention that in the book. You look so pure.
I know, I really should have.
You
just
should
to
have.
twist the knife in
Yes.
a little bit. But even though we've given each other plenty of grief about this over the years, I've also realized that this was part of our trajectory, being folks of color in institutions where there weren't that many of us, and figuring out how we would relate and how we would situate ourselves with respect to other people in our communities was a big challenge. And we approached it in different ways, ultimately arriving at more or less the same outcome, since, as he himself would say, I may have married a white girl, but he is now dating them. So that's how it worked out.
So I want to talk about resilience sort of more explicitly, because you've both met people who have gone through things that are similar to you and who haven't coped as well. And this may be a little embarrassing, but basically I want to figure out how come you have been able to overcome what you've had to deal with and others have not quite as well. So Travis, for instance, you, I know, are talking to a lot of veterans all the time, many of whom are badly wounded also, and who suffer from mental as well as physical problems. What do you tell them? How do you help them? And specifically when you're dealing with someone who isn't like you, who isn't just the kind of person who, as you said earlier, just decides, you know what, I'm just going to put that away and I'm going to get on with the job, who isn't that kind of person. What do you tell them?
Well, I mean, it's two different audiences. I get emails from parents or soldiers that I served with, and that's a whole different conversation than people I don't know. Mm-hmm. If it's somebody I served with, I just tell them to look at what they have now. I had a buddy of mine call me that was going to lose his wife and his 2 kids because he couldn't get over something that happened in Afghanistan on one day, and I just looked at him and I said, what is your problem? I said, what is holding you back from something that happened 2 years ago in Afghanistan that doesn't matter, that's not relevant in your life? You're going to throw away your family because you can't let the past go. So I call that like the hard truth side. To people I don't know, when I speak to them, I just tell them my story. I tell them I'm not a wounded warrior. I actually hate the term wounded. If I was still wounded, I wouldn't be sitting here today. I'd still be in the hospital bed. I have scars. They're awesome. Ladies, still married. But I go around the nation speaking to all different sorts of people. Today I'm here, tomorrow I'm here, and then I'm in St. Louis speaking to an insurance company, and then I'm in Vegas speaking to a banking establishment. So it's not just my story with military, it's my story with everybody, and I just tell them my whole thing. Born in a small town, I went to the military after high school, found my way, got married, had a beautiful family, and everything going right for me. Stepped on a bomb, had to find my way again. And through my story, I let people know that I don't think, one, I served more than anybody else. That's in the author's note. I don't think I served any more, any harder. I did anything more special. I just had a rough day at work. Case of the old Mondays, huh? We've all been there, And then I tell them that my problems are no more than anybody else. Yes, visually I'm different. Physically, I'm limited to a few things that I can't do, which isn't much. I skydive, I snowboard. I'm going to go shark diving, hopefully, with great whites in a tank. That's my next goal. I downhill mountain bike. So there's things that I do. But besides for that, visually when you see me, I'm mentally good and I'm thankful for that. So I try to tell people I don't hold my problems any more than anybody else's. I think we all have a playing field that we're on, and we're all going through something. With your family members or with yourself. And I can't see everything, but I hope that my story somehow impacts people. And I'll tell you about my book real quick. If you like The Notebook, Forrest Gump, right, and a little bit of American Sniper maybe, you get my book, but true story. First time I met President Bush, former President Bush, I actually told him, I'm so nervous I could pee right now. And that's what Forrest Gump told him. So And I didn't even know I did that until 2 days later. But you know, I like to joke around, have fun, and tough as they come, that's what it's all about. Just overcoming situations, being resilient, and when I talk to crowds, I just let them know I don't consider myself a victim. I'm not wounded. Don't pity me. I'm not a sob story. And let's have fun with this. Let's just disarm the situation. You know what I mean? It's what I do.
But I mean, you know.
My feet don't touch the ground. If you guys are making fun of me for that, I'm trying so hard, but they just won't touch.
But when you're dealing with, I mean, you know, someone who, we know a lot of veterans come back, they have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, they have nightmares, and in your book you're like, you know, if I think about unpleasant memories of combat, I just shut them off. That's how I deal with them.
Well,
How do you talk to people who can't shut them off? What do you say?
I mean, I'm not a medical professional, so I don't try to dive in. I try to tell them to seek help. The help's out there. I wouldn't say I shut them off. I mean, I enjoyed the military. I had one bad day. I enjoyed everything I did. Whether it's my firefights, there's an adrenaline rush you not ever understand until you're in one. You know, if you read the book, yes, I've killed people. It just is what it is, and it had to be done because I had to get through it. I'm not a murderer by no means. They shot first and a lot more than I did. But I try to point them in the right direction, open their eyes to what they still have and what they're able to still achieve. And you know, I just make sure they get the help that they need. That's why I started the foundation. We bring up traumatically injured service members and their families, because their families are going through it too, to build a network to let them know they're not alone. It's actually a $2.7 million project I'm in charge of, so donate now. TravisMills.org. That's a joke. You guys don't have to. Seriously, we're good. But you know, and that's my way of giving back. Show them how to kayak, canoe, boat, swim, fish, be an active member in society, and play a really positive role in their family's overall well-being. So we have some pretty cool things going on, and if I can't help them, you know, with what I say, I don't try to dive in and tell them what they need to do. I just tell them to go seek out the help. I'll give them numbers of people they can call, and luckily my foundation has helped me build a network with other foundations that specialize in PTSD or traumatic brain injuries and things of that nature.
Well, so Danelle, you also, I mean, you have succeeded in an extraordinary way, but your friends from your church, from your school in Harlem, many of them, as you describe in your book, they had babies early, they joined gangs, they just didn't thrive in the way that you did. And obviously some of that is you being smart, but I think it's probably not just that. You're still in touch with a lot of them. What is your sense of why you were able to get past that and go on to college and everything else, and they weren't? What got in their way?
So there were a few factors. First is, and this is something I make a point to emphasize in the book, you can't discount luck. I mean, there are many moments where I was fortunate to be on the receiving end of an intervention that just so happened to take place because someone was watching me do something at a particular point in time, or saw me read a book and was motivated enough to have a conversation with me. This goes back to the moment I narrate in the memoir, where the person who helped me get into private school in Manhattan had been just watching me read at the shelter one afternoon and was motivated enough to come enter my family's life and seek us out. So those kinds of interventions, those moments, loom really large in the book. And I spend a fair bit of time trying to think about how it was, in fact, simply because of these very fortunate instances of people noticing something and coming to my aid that I was able to end up where I did end up. But I would also say that one of the things that was very helpful to me was having, in the form of my mother, a certain kind of excellence modeled. And that excellence, in the first instance, revolved around patience. Mom pushed my brother and me and demanded a great deal from us. But she also taught us the virtue of being patient with ourselves. And this was something that I do not think necessarily comes naturally to me, if anything comes naturally. But she was insistent that we be patient with our own growth, and that we understand that some things were not going to come easily, but that in time, if we just kept working on them, we would eventually be able to master those things in which we found ourselves to be at the time deficient. The third thing I would single out is, and this is something that I especially linger on in the book, is the importance of teaching. So I've talked about mentors intervening at particularly crucial stages, but there's a subset of mentors that I really need to single out. Teachers made it possible, and one of the reasons why some of the outcomes that my friends had differed from the outcomes that I've had to do with our differential access to teaching. I had access to these amazing teachers in part because I had the good fortune to end up at this phenomenal school. And my friends didn't have access to many of these same great teachers. And so if anything, one of the things that the book speaks to is how, in fact, our investments in education pay off and materialize in the lives of the young. To invest in the kinds of teaching that can be transformative enough to put someone like me on the path to success is, I think, one of our great social obligations, and a point I insist on in the book. The last thing I'll say is that I had the good luck, again I say luck, I always insist on luck, to be in a position where my kind of potential contribution was valued. I was told from fairly early on that it was okay to be kind of dorky. I was told that it was okay to read as much as I wanted. I was told that, well, if you're going to keep reading at the dinner table, at least don't be quite so obnoxious about it, but you can still read at the dinner table. And all of these small moments of affirmation in who I was and who I wanted to be add up in the long run. They aggregate. And it's in those many small moments that I began to realize something not only about myself, but about the people who cared most about me in my life.
So, okay, so that's comparing to other people who you grew up with in Harlem in the early part of your life. Comparing you to the kids you met at Collegiate, this private Manhattan school that you're talking about, the superb school, and later at Princeton, obviously a lot of them did not have difficult childhoods. And you know, the difficulties that you faced are obvious. Is there any sense in which that you felt you had an advantage over kids who had a very easy early life? Do you think it gave you anything that they did not have?
At different points in my life, I would have answered the question differently. So when I was younger, and I speak about this a little bit in one of the incidents I recount in the book, my response to high school classmates' insinuation that I'd only gotten into Princeton because of my skin color. I was under the conviction that my classmates had in fact not had any meaningful struggles of their own. At various points, especially when I was finishing up at high school, I kept thinking to myself, well, what is it that they've overcome exactly? And it took me a fair bit of growing up to realize that some of my classmates had actually had to deal with pretty serious challenges of their own. And some of them came from very fractured homes and had experienced forms of suffering that I had not had quite to the same extent or with nearly as much of a detrimental impact by the time I was 15, 16, 17, 18. But I also came to the conclusion that there were aspects of my life journey that had uniquely empowered me and had uniquely equipped me to succeed in certain kinds of environments. So one of the things that I grew happiest about as I got older was the realization that my being bilingual had empowered me to think of myself as capable of inhabiting these many different kinds of environments and these many different kinds of linguistic spaces. I felt comfortable not only switching between English and Spanish, and not only with taking up new languages and learning new languages, but in the kinds of code switching and dialect switching and register switching that I saw some of my friends having a really hard time committing to or mastering. I also realized that the fact that I had been forced to juggle two worlds from a fairly early age had trained me in the art of knowing how and where to situate myself in relation to different people as context demanded. And this is something that I try to lay out in the book. It's a sense of how each situation called me to be and act in different ways, not without being untrue to myself, but in the full recognition that in different situations there would be different kinds of social expectations. This is all something that I learned in part because of having to be forced to juggle these different environments, and it was that kind of forced exposure for which I'm grateful.
So what he said, I mean, the amazing thing, what you're in fact saying is that what's clear in his book is he managed to be cool even while being a total nerd. I mean, the incredible thing is that you weren't just a nerd. You also really wanted to be cool, and you were very clear that reading, at least in the first part of your life, was not cool, and yet you persisted in doing it, which is is very admirable because not everyone does that. So I have some questions from you all, and I'm going to read them out. And this is for both of you. Oh, I thought I read it. What made you decide, or what encouraged you to write your books?
I'll hop up on this one. All right. So for me, I was doing a lot of speaking. At the hospital, I became what is known as the mayor of Building 62, where all of us lived at. And because I had a gentleman named Todd Nicely, who was a quadruple amputee, visit me, I decided I was going to visit everybody as soon as they got through the door at Walter Reed and help and assist them through their recovery. So from that, they would come down and say, hey, Travis, we have a new patient. I can't tell you the name or the room number, but he's not in 48 and he's not in 50. I'm like, all right, cool. So like 46? And then, that's a joke. It was 49. And through that, they would say, you know, okay, cool. Here's this guy. Here's his name. Here's his room number. His mom's here. His dad's here, and his wife. And I actually started assembling teams to go up with me that were in all different stages of recovery. So some in wheelchairs, some on short legs, some on taller legs, and some with walking canes, and then some like, you know, with their full body parts and everything. So we had like a team of 9 guys one time meet 12 incoming patients because it was a pretty bad year for us overseas with injury. But on that note, is also we're thankful that Battlefield Medicines came so far that we actually lived through those kind of situations, because the Vietnam era they didn't. But from there, I went to the Boston bombing victims and I assembled a team that the Army, the general called me to ask me to get a team ready. We went up there and we met them, and we would go around and meet the people that were in the bombing at Spalding Rehab, and we were able to work out with them and do, you know, physical therapy and occupational therapy for 4 days. It was amazing. And just kind of my overall demeanor, everybody at the hospital was really encouraging on my recovery, and would tell their patients to look up to me. And then I started speaking to companies, you know, Fortune 500 companies down to middle schoolers that think I'm Iron Man and I have awesome tricks. And I tell them that. I tell them this arm has missiles, I can't wear it. But just kind of through my experience, I was told that I could really help change a lot of people's perspective of their life and help them get through situations that I would probably never understand what they were going through, but some way I could help. And the book came around. We had 5 meetings scheduled, went to Random House. They were such a great team, and we're so thankful to meet with them and meet Mary and Campbell and the team I work with. Wade, if anybody wants to talk about me coming to your school, possibly, Wade runs everything for me. He's got me on the road. I don't even know what my family looks like anymore. I know it's sad. But that's how the book came about, and we've been very fortunate since it came out in October on the 27th to make the New York Times bestsellers list, and really helps me go around and explain my story and help people in a positive and impactful way.
Dano?
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you.
I came to the book and to the writing of the book not long after a Wall Street Journal profile about my life was published in the spring of 2006. At the time, I was a senior at Princeton, and I was still undocumented, and I was grappling with what lay in store for me in the future. I didn't know if I would be able to hang out in the States after graduation. I didn't have any job prospects. I was preparing myself for the possibility of leaving the United States and pursuing graduate study in the UK, because I felt incredibly frustrated about what being undocumented meant in terms of my near immediate future. After the Wall Street Journal article came out, I was nudged in the direction of writing a book. And I was initially pretty hesitant. As I mentioned in various points in the memoir, I tend to favor certain kinds of secrecy. I didn't feel particularly comfortable with the idea that I would write this memoir about my life. I didn't even know how I would begin writing a memoir about my life. And I'd never done anything quite like this form of writing before. But eventually I came to the conclusion that the memoir would be worth writing and in fact deserved my attention if it met 2 criteria, basically. The first was that the memoir would contribute to a conversation about immigration and about immigration policy in the United States, and that I would use my life as a way to reflect on some of the absurdities of immigration policy in the United States. The second criterion that I set to myself and that I consciously returned to when I was actually working on the memoir was the hope that the memoir would speak to not only immigration, but also what it means to be a poor person of color navigating all of these different worlds. And Furthermore, if in fact the memoir could empower other people who had had the experiences that I'd had or experiences similar to mine to write their own stories, then my decision to write the memoir would be worthwhile, or that's what I thought at the time. And so it was with those two principles in mind that I then was paired up with an agent who shopped my proposal around, and then I sat down to write, and then I realized that I really did not know anything about writing a memoir, and it took me 6 years to write the memoir. So that's what motivated me to take on the task of writing it.
Well, I mean, why don't you say something about what you think immigration policy ought to be? I mean, in the book, you're really focused on the DREAM Act because that's the specific legislation that seemed most likely to pass and also that would have an impact on you, but it doesn't affect all immigrants. I think it just applies to children who are brought to this country under the age of 16 by their parents. What do you think, I know this is a long topic, but what do you think our immigration policy should be?
So in the book, I indicate that I had begun having some measure of ambivalence about the DREAM Act, precisely for the reason you mentioned, which is that the DREAM Act, when it was formulated and introduced year after year in Congress, even in its most generous or most capacious forms, would not have accommodated huge numbers of the undocumented population or the undocumented population in its entirety. I also think that there's a problem in the discourse about the DREAM Act, the previous discourses about the DREAM Act, this idea that, for example, we should exonerate the children from the faults of their parents seems to me to beg the question, because I don't think, for one, that my parents did anything wrong in the decision to stick it out here and line my brother and me up for the kinds of opportunities that we enjoyed. So I'm in favor for comprehensive immigration reform. I am fully aware, though, that this comprehensive immigration reform, which would include, in my view, a path to legalization and eventual naturalization for the undocumented, as well as a comprehensive overhaul of the entire immigration apparatus, is at this point a twinkle in the eye, because it will in almost all likelihood not come to pass in the immediate future. But in place of hoping for that, I now hope for a variety of small and medium scale measures, such as the eventual successful, I hope, court resolution of the DACA Plus and DAPA programs, and state and local initiatives to help out undocumented immigrants.
So here's another question that is for both of you, and it's pretty general, and we've touched on this. What would you recommend to, these are teachers, what would you recommend to our students who are struggling with personal conflicts? Maybe Travis first.
Oh, okay. I mean, you got to find your solution through what you think your end goal is. So for me, my end goal was to be able to be independent, to be able to drive my family around, to feed myself. And mine were pretty cut and dry, pretty easy situation. But what I encourage people to do is to set goals, find out what their goals in life are going to be. I do short-term and long-term. And then if people are going through personal struggles, I just tell them to find a way through it. Find what your end goal is going to be, and then take the route that you need to get there. Not every day my recovery was a success. My first day I walked, they said I'd walk 1 lap, I walked 3. I mean, it was awesome. The next day they said, I told my dad I was going to walk 5 laps, and I walked a half a lap and I fell over. It was like the worst, most crushing day of my recovery. But with that, I was going in the right direction. So I like to tell people that, my success wasn't every day was a step in the right direction, but wasn't a success every day. So just really break down everything that you're doing, find out what it is that makes you happy and what your goals are, and how to, then you can find a solution through, what your end, you can find a solution through knowing what your end goal is. And any personal struggles you have, you can really get through and achieve by finding out what you really want to accomplish through your goals. It sounded really bad, I'm sorry. That was a rough one. You guys know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You feel me? Sorry, I like to joke around. By the way, nothing offends me if you guys talk to me outside. I still have everything still works. I just want to set that out there, so if you guys ask questions and take pictures, you guys know to ask me whatever you want. Nothing bothers me. Sorry about that.
So my advice for students who are dealing with personal conflict, in the first instance, has to do with a little bit of Latin that my high school teacher shared with me Just as we were getting started on reading Virgil's Aeneid, it's a very famous line, "For sonnet haec olim meminisse iuvabit." Perhaps it will be pleasing one day to remember even these things. But what I learned from my high school teacher when we actually discussed this in class was that this little bit of optimistic expectation could cut in several different ways. It may very well be that things in the future are even worse than they are now, so don't be too optimistic, right? No, but what I would really tell students is to see personal conflicts as an opportunity for growth. In situations of conflict, in situations where we are really being tested, our core selves are being tested, our identities are being tested, we should see in these opportunities the chance to really imagine ourselves in a new and different light, to grow and mature in ways that we may not have thought possible. And so depending on the kind of personal conflict in question, I would ask teachers to support their students in some of the same ways that I found my teachers were most supportive of me. Obviously by giving plenty of encouragement, but also by the simple act of being present. This is something that has mattered so much to me. Oftentimes, it's not anything that we can say or verbalize explicitly that will matter. It's the simple act of standing next to someone, sitting next to someone, being there with someone that can help a student deal with his or her personal conflicts in a way that proves to be productive and in the long term, empowering.
So I feel like these are very supportive answers, and yet, Travis, sometimes you found in your work in the Army that that was actually not the thing to do. And Travis, for a while, worked as a jump master, which meant that on occasion, when a soldier was afraid, he would have to kick him out of a plane. And
Well,
so
or
I was,
throw him, either way.
or
I mean,
throw him, or
I
push him.
Kicked one, threw the other.
And so I was just wondering if you thought that there were times when support is actually not the answer and when people need a kick out of the plane.
Well, I mean, it depends on the situation,
Right.
obviously. So in that instance, if they didn't jump out of the plane, they were going to lose pay. They were going to get in a lot of trouble, put on extra duty, and get ridiculed for not wanting to jump out of a C-17 or C-130, which made no sense because it's like the most fun you can have. So in those instances where you know what's best for the person and they look up to you for guidance and support, you just have to make the right call. And they thank me when they hit the ground. I mean, one guy broke his leg, but I'm just kidding. But and then other situations you need to be supportive. For me, my wife has never really seen me cry. My daughter was born, and I made weird sounds, and in the room was like, and the nurse said, "It's okay to cry, Mr. Mills." I'm like, "Oh no, cry." That was weird. That's what I said. And they're like, "Oh my gosh, this guy's taking this little girl home." And then after my explosion, because of the concussion, my nerves were kind of all out of whack in my brain, so my emotions ran high. And she saw me cry, and she was just there to listen to me and help me out. And she didn't yell at me to stop crying, which I was thankful for, because it made the situation worse. I don't know why I told you guys that, but anyway. No, so there's some situations that dictate the outcome. And I think when it came to guys jumping out of airplanes, if they were going to lose pay and it was a job that they were trained to do, you got to give them a push in the right direction, which was out the door at 900 feet up in the air. But other things, you have to be supportive and be there by them and encourage them to do the right thing, but make them ultimately make their own decisions.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.